misunderstanding about it. I still hear
Yeah.
people saying PCA ruling. It was
Yeah.
not PCA. Many people misunderstanding it as this is about sovereignty claims.
Yeah.
It was not about sovereignty claims. Can you tell us about it? Ano yung ambag nung arbitration award niyan? In what ways has it made the situation better for the Philippines and for the region? And may ambag pa rin ba yan after all the Duterte antics? Let's just put it that way. 6 years of saying piece of paper, essentially the Chinese line. That's what he regurgitated.
Oh, definitely. With respect to your last question, definitely may ambag pa yan because you now have other countries openly declaring their support for the arbitration and invoking it against China's excessive actions in the South China Sea. So all these people saying that it's just a piece of paper, etc.
These are Duterte.
That's completely disproven by the attitude of many countries that actually use the arbitration document, the decision.
Malaysia,
in
Indonesia,
dealing with
Vietnam,
China on
even
the South China
Taiwan.
Sea.
Yeah.
It's not just us anymore who invoke it. It's all these other countries.
Right.
Okay? Now, how did that come about? Well, if you recall, in 2012, China took control of Scarborough Shoal. Okay. And the Philippines basically, of course, could not use force to take it back. The Philippines also suffered, well, it was a serious loss, not just physically, but, reputation, in terms of reputation and standing in the international community. Okay? So I guess the Aquino administration at the time decided that, okay, in order to make up for that, in order to recover it, let's use whatever means we have. And it so happened that the legal means was available. It wasn't easy. It took some convincing.
You were skeptical of it at the beginning when it came out?
If
I'm not mistaken, you were skeptical.
Yeah, I was a skeptic at the time. But, as it is with law, sometimes you'll be surprised in a way.
Good way, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the idea was we had the disputes with China. It was huge, big, complex, many different aspects. But it was clear that there were two types of disputes: the territorial disputes, who has sovereignty over the islands, and the maritime disputes, who is entitled to all the waters around these islands, so including territorial sea, but also potential
the fishery
EEZ,
resources, the oil and gas, and all those resources.
Because the resources are there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when you think about it, actually, the more important one is the maritime dispute because that's where all the resources are.
Correct.
It's not all on those islands; it's in the waters around them. Okay, so China was claiming everything, which would leave us with practically nothing. But we were insisting, no, international law says that we are allowed or we're entitled to something, and that is the 200-mile EEZ and continental shelf, which China conveniently ignores. Okay? Well, we were both signatories to the same document, the UNCLOS.
And ratified it.
Yeah, and we both ratified it. In fact, when UNCLOS was being negotiated, China was on the side of the Philippines and other developing countries in advocating for this EEZ and expanded continental shelf. No? So it's actually unfair that after they got stronger and more powerful economically, suddenly they'll turn around on the agreement and say that no, we're entitled to something more. Okay, anyway, so the Philippines was able to take advantage of the dispute settlement provisions in UNCLOS and found a way to hail China to court before an arbitral tribunal, essentially. No? This is an ad hoc arbitral tribunal under Annex 7 of UNCLOS. There are people who are claiming that since the tribunal is not part of the UN or is not part of the ICJ, or it's not
you
valid.
didn't need mutual consent on this. There is a compulsory arbitration.
But these are all unlearned people who don't understand how
from a certain embassy.
They don't understand how these things work. Okay, the power of the tribunal comes from UNCLOS itself. The jurisdiction of the tribunal comes from the fact that both parties ratified UNCLOS, and in so doing, they also are deemed to have submitted themselves to the dispute settlement mechanisms under UNCLOS. And with respect to the Philippines and China, it so happened that they are deemed to have agreed to arbitration as a means for settling any disputes over interpretation and application of UNCLOS. Now,
so what's the Chinese line that, oh, but there are exemption clauses and we have invoker and exemption, but that applies if it's a sovereignty claim, right? Or something like that.
There are
and
various
not,
exceptions. And the Philippines was able to successfully argue that none of the exceptions applied because we really sort of narrowed down the issues to just the issue of entitlement to the maritime zones, particularly the EEZ and continental shelf. No? So by doing that, no, we were actually able to narrow down the area of the dispute first. No? China was claiming everything, no? But we were able to show that that is not legally possible. And the only thing that China can legally or properly claim is actually just the islands themselves and the territorial sea around them, which turns it into a small pocket, really. So that is the sovereignty dispute. That's the territorial dispute.
Right.
We were able to successfully argue that, that's the only thing that's legitimately disputed. With respect to the maritime dispute, the dispute over the waters around them, including the resources there, that can be resolved under UNCLOS.
Right.
Okay? And it was. And it so happened that it has been resolved in our favor. So the tribunal, of course, faced with China's non-participation, actually had to take the cudgels for China, find out all the arguments that China could raise against us.
By sifting through their scholars'
yes,
arguments,
sifting through everything that
yeah.
had been produced so far. And despite that, they were able to find out that, China's positions are untenable. This excessive claim to the 9-dash line has no support.
Based on some historical myth.
It's not an old historic claim because it's fairly new.
Yeah.
And it was
from
never
Kuomintang of Taiwan.
Yeah, and it was never actually essentially the tribunal understood that the claim did not clearly cover the waters until around 2009. Because that was when China began acting.
The 9-dash line.
Yeah, that's when they began acting in a way that showed that they were asserting claims over the waters in excess of what was allowed by international law.
Right.
Okay. So
but of course,
it's
the
a very
Chinese
young
will say
claim.
it's not their claim. It's not their fault. It's Malaysia and Vietnam. The joint submission of extended continental. Obviously, they will always blame someone else, right?
Yeah.
If it's not U.S., it's the Philippines. If it's not Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam. We're just clarifying this to the audience because unfortunately, there's a lot of nonsense out there, right?
Yeah.
Some people are not very learned, but some people have an interest in disinformation, unfortunately, and sometimes they do cooperate, right? Yeah. Inadvertently. So I wanted to clarify this. Now, the thing is, of course, the arbitration award is not only being invoked by some of our neighbors to defend their claims, but it also gave kind of a legal justification for America's aggressively expanded freedom of navigation operations, right?
Well,
in a way, doesn't it make easier for them and also make it easier also for European countries, other countries to say, hey, see, China has no business of claiming these fake islands, so we can pass within their 24 or even 12 nautical miles in the case of U.S.
U.S. freedom of navigation operations began even before the tribunal.
Exactly, but
issued
the frequency, the aggressiveness, the number of warships.
Well, definitely, what you could say is
isn't there correlation there?
There probably is a correlation in the sense that since the time that the tribunal's decision was promulgated, the support for the U.S. position, basically became stronger legally because it wasn't just a U.S. position anymore. You had a tribunal, an independent tribunal's analysis and decision now being consistent with the U.S. views, particularly on the point that the islands in the South China Sea, which are scattered there, do not generate EEZ's continental shelf. And that the South China Sea cannot be subject, the entire South China Sea cannot be subject to any of these so-called historic claims of China. That basically means that the South China Sea is largely an area where all nations, not just the US, but everyone else, had full freedom of navigation.
Right.
And that freedom can be exercised by all vessels, not just commercial, but also military vessels. So that's consistent with the U.S. position. And that's why the U.S. basically found support no, in the tribunal's decision.
Before ending this very nice conversation, because I